approach to the evidence led at the trial that leads me to the belief that no reasonable tribunal could have reached the conclusions that they did on that evidence. And I may say that is precisely one of the 6 grounds upon which the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission held that there might have been a miscarriage of justice in Mr McGrahi's case.
I'm grateful, Convener.
Thank you very much. JB?
Thank you, Convener. And further to my earlier general declaration of interest, I don't know if I do need to declare this, but I feel I should. I have had previous contact with Mr Iain McKie in my previous existence as working with Alec Neil when he was campaigning on behalf of his daughter. I just thought that would be important to put on the record. Gentlemen, thank you for coming today to provide your evidence. In taking forward your petition, I see that you've called for a full and open public inquiry and lobbied a variety of bodies, individuals and foreign governments. The question that begets 2 questions, I think. Firstly, is this in relation to the inquiry you're calling for the Scottish Government to have, or is this in relation to another full and open public inquiry?
It's in relation, Mr Hepburn, excuse me, to the inquiry that we ask in this petition be set up by the Scottish Government. And when I made the opening statement, I pointed out that all these aspects were within the purview of Scots law and of the Scottish Government. And I think the word independent is extraordinarily important in our petition, because you are already aware that the criminal investigation was run by the Scottish police forces, and the trial itself, of course, involved entirely Scottish lawyers, and therefore there are at least 2 obvious groups within our country who, if one thinks momentarily about the McKie case already mentioned, there are at least 2 groups, therefore, who might be interested in protecting their reputations as to how they performed during this trial, the run-up to it, and the consequences of it. And for that reason, it's not for us to say how this committee should try to persuade the Scottish Government to take the matter up, and nor is it within our remit to say how the inquiry should be constituted. I would say simply, speaking as now for a moment as a relative who's been looking for the truth for 21, nearly 22 years, I think it would be vital that any inquiry that is set up is seen to be led impartially. It might be that it was felt that such impartiality could only be secured by having a president or whatever from out with Scotland herself. I don't know. I'm not qualified to talk on that. All I'm saying here is that such an inquiry would be of little value if it was deemed to be in any way tied or limited by the interests of any of the groups who had been involved in the setting up and carrying through of this trial. I think there is a big issue here that the politicians of this country need to look at. But given an obviously impartial president, then this might be the way forward to redeeming what, unfortunately, and this is very embarrassing for me to say, I spent 3 years trying to persuade Colonel Gaddafi to allow his men to appear in front of Scottish justice, because I believed that Scottish criminal justice was amongst the fairest in the world. And so I think that the consequence of this trial is seen outside Scotland as far more damaging even than many people see it to be within Scotland. And I've had occasion to travel almost all over the world in connection with this, and believe you me, the reputation of Scottish justice has been shot to pieces by their performance in this trial. We need to find out and say for ourselves boldly and surely, was this verdict justified or was it not? And that's why we've come to this committee in the hope that a vehicle can be created in Scotland to replace the withdrawal of Mr McGrahi's second appeal. And if that can be done, I think that is the only way, really, that we will be able to heal the dreadful wound that's been made in the reputation of our justice system, which was one of the few jewels, I may remind you, to survive the Act of Union.
Okay, so it was you wrote to these other bodies in respect of your request for the Scottish Government to have an inquiry. That begets two questions in itself. What was the rationale in doing so? And we know what the Scottish Government's response was. What was their response?
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry to interrupt. You said that we wrote to these other bodies. Are you referring to the General Assembly of the UN, etc., to get the Scottish Government?
Yeah, I'm referring. I mean, I've got a list here, and you can confirm whether it's accurate or not. The President of the General Assembly of the United Nations Organisation.
Yes, I've got the list in front of me as well.
Yeah, well, it'll play that list.
Yes, no, these were. We launched a campaign to have the verdict investigated, following our initial incarnation, where we were interested in putting forward a case for Mr al-Megrahi's compassionate release. Once he was released, we then launched a campaign to see if we could persuade the General Assembly of the United Nations to conduct an inquiry under its own auspices. There is, in fact, no connection whatsoever between the approaches to the bodies on this list and any attempt to persuade them to persuade the Scottish Government to open an inquiry.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Because I'm a little confused now, because I thought the answer a minute ago was you did write to them in respect of the request for a... No. Maybe there's been slight confusion here. So they were written to...
There is a little, yes.
Right, okay. That's clear. So, yeah, well, can I move on then to ask another question? Because you've been pretty clear that... from your perspective, it's legitimate for the Scottish Government to have an inquiry on the grounds you've set out. But do you have any sympathy with the view that to really get to the truth of the matter, that it would require an inquiry more international in scope?
Let's start slightly at the beginning of this. The first Scottish court to look at this problem was the Fatal Accident Inquiry. That inquiry spent a great part of its time looking at aviation security at London's Heathrow Airport. And those efforts by the FAI might well be modified very extensively should this verdict fail in the long run. And that is one example, I think, of how we have a locus in Scotland to examine many aspects of this without having to refer outside our own country. And may I just repeat that the rule of mea culpa, I'm to blame, putting up our hands and saying we got it wrong, is the way that would seem to me to be to go down if we are to recover our reputation in Scotland. Bob?
May I? Yes. What we are asking the Scottish Government to do is to hold an inquiry into the conviction by a Scottish court of Mr Megrahi. That is what this petition is aimed at. Now, it may very well be that if such an inquiry were held and that doubt was cast on the verdict against Mr Megrahi, it might then be that the door was opened to other bodies or other governments holding an inquiry, a much more wide-ranging inquiry, into what actually happened at Lockerbie, who was responsible for it. That is not what we are asking for in this petition. But the fact that there is a verdict against Mr Megrahi, which at the moment still stands, is being used as an excuse and a pretext by governments which do have the power to hold a wide-ranging inquiry into what actually happened at Lockerbie, governments like the United Kingdom government. They use the fact that there is an extant standing conviction against a person in a Scottish court as a reason for not holding a wide-ranging inquiry into Lockerbie. So one of the purposes of this petition is to clear that logjam. We want to retrieve the reputation of the Scottish criminal justice system, but in doing so, that will have the beneficial side effect that the pretext or excuse that is currently being used by governments which do have the power to hold an inquiry into what actually happened at Lockerbie, it will deprive them of that excuse.
I wonder, could I say a word?
Yes. I'm conscious of time marching on. I want members
on these
to
2
ask
points
as many
because I
questions.
feel it's got to be said. I'm not here. I don't have the in-depth knowledge of Lockerbie that these gentlemen have, but my whole family has been affected by Lockerbie, as many hundreds and thousands of Scottish people have been. My son was forced to leave the police service. My daughter went through 14 years of hell. These are facts. I have suffered at the hands of the Scottish justice system, but I have also benefited from the Scottish justice system. So going back to Mr Butler and Mr Hepburn, yes, this is a matter to be sorted out in Scotland. It's an indelible stain on Scotland's justice system, no one else's justice system. And if America want to blame us, and every country wants to blame us, this is not the point. The point is we need to pick this up, say independently, it's our responsibility, and we need to stand up to be counted in the world. I expect it, and I really believe there are many, many of our citizens in Scotland to expect that to happen.
Yes, Nigel. I'm sorry, we'll have to move on and get an opportunity.
Thank you, Vina. Can I say I'm very interested to hear what you've had to say. I don't claim to know very much about this at all, and I feel as though I'm much better informed already. But I would like to put to you a constitutional problem, and this is probably to Professor Black in his legal context. Can I really expect any Scottish government to say that it disagrees with its own courts? Is there not a constitutional difficulty here that we really are on very, very sinking sand when we allow a government to say, well, that's what the courts have decided, but we don't happen to agree with it?
It is not, sir, what we are asking the Scottish Government to do. We are asking the Scottish Government to set up an inquiry. The Scottish Government cannot deny that there is domestic and international concern about this particular verdict of a Scottish court. We are not asking the Scottish Government to say, we think this verdict is wrong and to do something about it. We are asking them to investigate these concerns, to set up an inquiry which will investigate these concerns. They are in no way, by so doing, in any way coming into conflict with the Scottish courts. I mean, one of the principal functions of government is to maintain the integrity of the justice system. And that is what we are asking this government to do, through holding an inquiry into concerns which have been expressed, both in Scotland and internationally, about this decision of a Scottish court.
Can I say, Convener, that I understand that, and I do genuinely understand the point that you're making, Professor. But I don't think this is just an academic point, concerned that if that were to happen, we'd then be in a position where we have precedent for the Scottish Government instituting an inquiry into potentially any court case that it didn't like, found inconvenient. Is that really a precedent which the legal system actually wants to see? I understand the point. I'm not denying what you're here for, but I'm just worried about the legal consequences of this.
I say, sir, once again, that the Scottish Government and successive Scottish governments do this all the time. It's one of the reasons why they set up a body called the Scottish Law Commission. They are forever referring matters of concern arising out of court decisions and elsewhere to the Scottish Law Commission, and no one has ever suggested there is some constitutional impropriety there.
Is it on that particular point? And then I'll bring in Robin and then Anne. Just very, very briefly, because I'm really conscious I want to get as many people.
Indeed. Forgive me, Professor, but you make reference to the Scottish Law Commission. And of course, the Scottish